He's got the best volleys in 25 years. Unbelievable. And people are trying to copy him. You watch, like Sinner, these other guys. It's going to be okay.
McEnroe just said the unsayable. On live television, the toughest voice in tennis finally stopped shielding Alcaraz. He revealed the crack the whole tour pretends not to see. There is one shot the Spaniard still keeps avoiding on the practice court, long after every match is already won. The admission landed like a slap across the sport. Rewind to February. Alcaraz had just crushed Djokovic in Melbourne for the Australian Open, and the internet crowned him untouchable within minutes. McEnroe watched the same match and saw something uglier. Sinner already smells blood. Go back further and the pattern deepens. Ferrero abandoned ship in December, Lopez seized command, and one stubborn habit followed the kid from academy to arena. Watch his training sessions. The forehand gets hammered for hours. Coaches polish the drop shot until it purrs. Yet one weapon barely earns a single rep. Every serious analyst has clocked the omission. Almost none will name it on camera. He can strike the thing beautifully. Grinding it out just never happens. Crave the breakdown, other channels are too scared to run? Smash subscribe and stay for the uncomfortable half. Let's walk onto that court and expose the shot he keeps skipping. The shot has a name, and it arrives with almost embarrassing modesty. Backhand slice. Nothing about that stroke lights up a stadium the way his topspin drive or his galloping forehand does. Most juniors learn the carve before they can grow a mustache, a low skidding thing that strips pace off the ball and hands a scrambling player an extra half second to breathe. Carlos Alcaraz can produce a passable version when a rally corners him. Left to his own instincts, though, he postpones it like a dull errand, reaching instead for the winner his hands were born to hit. That instinct is the whole story. Everything electric about him flows from a single hunger. The drop shot that dies on the second bounce, a forehand bent impossibly around the net post, his readiness to sprint 40 feet for a ball a sensible man would concede. He wants to end points fast. The crowd rising to its feet is the reward he chases every single time he loads up. A slice does the opposite of all that. It slows the world down, keeps the exchange alive, and demands that its owner win the unglamorous way, through patience and clever geometry rather than fireworks. For a talent wired to dazzle, few things feel less natural than deliberately draining the drama out of a rally. Understanding why the carve resists him means understanding what the stroke physically asks of a body. A topspin backhand rewards violence. The racket climbs, the strings brush up the back of the ball, and the harder a player swings, the more the shot dips safely back into the court. A slice inverts every one of those instincts. Its path runs high to low. The face opens toward the sky, and the ball is cut rather than crushed, spinning backwards so it floats, bites the court, and stays low after the bounce. Timing quietly replaces power as the currency of the shot. A player has to caress the ball at the exact height and let the backspin do the labor, while any leftover aggression simply sends the thing sailing long. For an athlete whose greatness is built on explosive racket head speed, dialing that speed down toward nothing becomes a real act of self-denial. The muscles that make him extraordinary are the very ones he must learn to switch off. Tim Henman put a polite version of the same idea on record during the Australian Open. Alcaraz, he pointed out, owns every shot in the book, yet keeps stretching for the highlight reel option when the moment quietly begs for restraint. Henman even drew the contrast with Jannik Sinner, who has spent the past year widening his own game, leaning on variety, threading more drop shots, finishing a little more often at the net. The Englishman framed it gently, the way a former pro tends to. Peel back the diplomacy, however, and the verdict underneath turns blunt. The Spaniard sometimes plays the shot that thrills him instead of the shot the scoreboard actually needs. Here is where the story stops being an opinion and starts becoming a paper trail. Long before McEnroe ever leaned into a microphone about it, one man had already circled this exact weakness in ink, and that man knew the game better than anyone alive. Juan Carlos Ferrero, the coach who raised Alcaraz from a skinny teenager into the best player on the planet, was asked years ago to list what his prodigy still lacked. His answer proved strikingly specific. He wanted more consistency on the serve. He wanted sharper direction on the return, cleaner blocking against the biggest deliveries. And tucked right there in the middle of that homework list sat one particular stroke he named without hesitation: the backhand slice. Think about how remarkable that admission was. A coach standing beside a freshly minted world number one, a teenager already collecting silverware faster than his shelves could hold it, and the single technical gap important enough to say out loud in public was the humble carve. Ferrero was not being cruel. He was being honest about the one shot that separated a phenomenon from a finished article. The slice is the connective tissue of a complete game. It buys recovery time on defense, it neutralizes a bully who wants to trade heavy from the baseline, and on a slick grass court it stays so low that an opponent has to manufacture his own pace off a ball that barely clears the ankle. A player without a reliable one is a Ferrari missing a reverse gear. Spectacular in a straight line, helpless the moment the situation asks him to slow down and reset. The reason this matters so much now, in this particular season, comes down to who Alcaraz has become, and who is standing across the net from him. Cast your mind back to that final in Melbourne. The victory over Novak Djokovic did not merely hand him the one major that had escaped him. It completed the full set. All 4 Grand Slam trophies gathered before most players have figured out their second serve. A career Grand Slam, sealed at an age that ought to be illegal. On paper, the resume looks flawless, untouchable, the work of someone with nothing left to fix. Yet the man in the commentary booth refused to read from that script. For a set and a half, McEnroe argued, the champion played tight and fussy, decorating rallies with unnecessary flourishes while the trophy sat there waiting to be taken cleanly. Only once his body loosened and the fear drained away did the real Alcaraz appear, and by then he had made the afternoon far harder than it ever needed to be. The critique carries weight precisely because it was not aimed at a single bad day. It targeted a pattern, a recurring reluctance to play the simple, disciplined percentage tennis that a fully rounded champion reaches for by reflex. The slice is the emblem of that missing discipline. Choosing it means admitting that flair is not always the answer, and admitting that is the hardest rep of all. Something else shifted underneath the season, something that turned this quiet flaw into the defining question of his next chapter. In December, the partnership that built him fractured. Ferrero, the mentor of a decade, stepped away, and the split sent a genuine tremor through the sport. Nobody expected the most stable, most successful coaching marriage in tennis to dissolve so early in a career still climbing toward its peak. Into the head coach chair stepped Samuel Lopez, the trusted assistant who had shadowed Alcaraz since late 2024, a quiet, meticulous technician rather than a former champion. Lopez had already stood in at previous events when Ferrero could not travel, so the relationship ran deep. His stated philosophy after taking charge was continuity above upheaval, with one meaningful tweak layered on top. He wanted the player himself more involved in the decisions, more engaged in the daily grind of building his own game. The encouraging precedent sits right there in recent memory. Not long ago, the serve was the punchline of every scouting report, a delivery that leaked cheap points at the worst possible moments and handed returners a rhythm they had no right to enjoy. Rather than accept that as a permanent tax, the team went to work refining the toss, the timing, and the intent until the shot stopped being a liability and began holding firm under real pressure. That project proved something crucial about this player. A flaw he chooses to attack rarely survives contact with his work ethic for long. The serve stopped bleeding free points. Returning grew into an actual strength. Fresh topspin and extra margin arrived on the backhand drive soon after. Only the carve still stands unbeaten, the last unconquered corner of a game that has swallowed every other weakness whole. The timing of Ferrero's exit adds another layer of intrigue. A coach who has guided a player since childhood tends to hold a rare kind of authority, the sort that lets him demand tedious work without much argument. When that voice departs, a portion of that leverage walks out of the building alongside him. Lopez is respected, sharp, and intimately familiar with his charge, yet he arrives as a colleague newly elevated rather than a father figure long obeyed. Persuading a champion to embrace the drudgery of a stroke he dislikes comes easier when the request carries a decade of accumulated trust behind it. The fresh arrangement is healthy in plenty of ways, plainly more collaborative, better suited to a man entering his prime, and refreshingly grown up. It also lengthens the odds that a shot the player would rather skip keeps sliding down the priority list, now that nobody with absolute veto power stands over the basket of balls. None of this means the picture is bleak, and honesty demands the other half of the truth. Alcaraz has not been ignoring his backhand entirely, far from it. Ahead of the clay swing last year, he rebuilt the mechanics of the shot, dropping his racket lower on the takeback to generate more topspin and, in his own words, more margin and safety. He borrowed the idea from backhands he admired around the tour, tried it, loved the feel, and kept it. The results showed up in cold numbers by early this season, with tracking data revealing his backhand and his return, historically the softest columns on his stat sheet, climbing sharply toward the level of his monstrous forehand. On the road to the Australian Open crown, he leaned on the slice more than he ever had, mixing it into rallies to change rhythm and drawing opponents forward before punishing them with a pass or a lob. So the carve is not absent. It is present, improving, and still nowhere near the ruthless standard the rest of his arsenal has already reached. Even that progress carries a warning folded inside it. Adding a shot to your repertoire, and depending on that shot under duress, sit on opposite sides of a wide, dangerous gulf. Sprinkling a few slices into a comfortable win over an overmatched opponent asks nothing of the nerve. Reaching for the identical stroke when the match is level, the legs are heavy, and a hostile arena holds its breath is a wholly different examination. A shot becomes truly yours only once you trust it in the ugliest possible moment, and trust that deep gets forged through thousands of joyless repetitions rather than a few confident cameos on a sunny afternoon. The carve has entered his game. Whether it has entered his instincts, the place where decisions happen in a single blink, stays the open question no highlight package will ever answer. That gap, the distance between a shot he can hit and a shot he trusts under pressure, is the entire ballgame. A slice you deploy occasionally to surprise a rival amounts to a party trick. A slice you can summon at deuce in the fifth set against a man teeing off on your backhand corner is a survival tool. The first version wins highlight reels. The second wins the wars that decide legacies. Alcaraz currently owns something between the two, closer to the trick than to the tool, and that is the precise vulnerability the sharpest eyes keep circling. Look at who exposes it and the theory hardens into something close to fact. The opponents who genuinely trouble him tend to share one trait. They can drive the ball flat, heavy, and deep into his backhand wing, over and over, refusing to give him the pace he loves to redirect. Sinner is the purest example, a metronome who takes the ball early and flattens it through the court until the errors come. When a rally becomes a backhand-to-backhand grind with no easy pace to feast on, the shot that lets a defender absorb pressure and reset the point is exactly the slice Alcaraz would rather avoid. Skip it, and the only escape route is a low-percentage bolt for the lines. The very gamble Henman warned about. The very impatience McEnroe watched cost him a comfortable evening in Melbourne. Picture the exact sequence that undoes him. Sinner works the backhand corner with flat, early-struck drives that arrive carrying almost no arc, denying Alcaraz the rising ball his topspin backhand feasts upon. Each exchange nudges the Spaniard another step behind the baseline. From back there, a full-blooded drive turns treacherous since the distance and the low contact point conspire against clean timing. The correct response in that instant is a deep, floating slice that resets the geometry, pushes Sinner backward, and buys the recovery step needed to rejoin the rally on level terms. Refuse that response, and the remaining options shrink to two, both grim. He can gamble on a flat winner from a hopeless position, or loop back a feeble reply that a player of Sinner's caliber puts away without mercy. The carve is the bridge between catastrophe and stability, and a champion unable to cross it keeps drowning in the same current. Now factor in the surfaces because the calendar makes this weakness bite harder at certain times of year. Grass is the great equalizer and the great exposer. A biting slice stays so low on a fast lawn that it forces an opponent into knee-height contact and coughs up short balls to attack. A player who cannot reliably carve on grass hands away a free tactical weapon on the one surface where creativity separates the good from the immortal. The same logic follows him onto quick indoor hard courts, where low, skidding trajectories wreck timing and rob big hitters of their rhythm. On the slow clay where his topspin already reigns, the absence hurts far less. Everywhere the ball stays low and hurries through, the missing carve turns from a footnote into a headline. Wimbledon sharpens these stakes to a fine point. The lawns of the All England Club have always rewarded players who can vary height, spin, and pace rather than merely overpower an exchange, because the low bounce robs time from anyone leaning on brute force alone. A skidding backhand slice is practically the native tongue of grass, the shot that folds a returner into an awkward crouch and pries the court open for whatever comes next. Alcaraz has already tasted glory on those lawns, yet the margins there run thin enough that one missing tool can swing an entire fortnight. Should a rival ever learn to keep the ball low and starve him of pace across a best-of-5 on grass, the absence of a trusted carve stops being theoretical and becomes the gap between hoisting the trophy and rehearsing another gracious runner-up speech. Sinner is the reason none of this can wait. The gap between the two best players alive is measured in inches and half steps, and it shrinks with every tournament they both enter. The Italian has openly committed to adding texture to his game, sprinkling in the drop shot, drifting forward to close points at the net, refusing to let his tennis calcify into one flat pattern. He is patching his own smaller holes while sharpening the parts that already gleam. If Alcaraz answers that project by pouring yet more energy into the forehand that needs no help and keeps treating the slice as an afterthought, he leaves a door propped open for the one rival ruthless enough to walk through it. Two players this evenly matched cannot afford donated weaknesses, and a neglected shot is the most generous donation of all. This is the moment the practice court stops being background scenery and becomes the whole plot. Matches reveal who a player is, practice decides who he becomes. Behind the closed gates of a training block, away from the roaring crowds and the television cameras, a champion chooses which shots to trust and which to bury. The temptation for a genius is brutal, because the flashy strokes reward him instantly. Crack 50 forehands and everyone screams back that he is the most gifted man in the sport. Grind out 50 slices and most of them feel clumsy, unsatisfying, beneath him. The dopamine points the wrong way, the ego resists the reps that would actually complete him. That resistance, dressed up in the language of instinct and style, is the quiet avoidance the whole story circles. It is not that he lacks the hand for the shot, it is that the shot offers him no glory, and glory is the oxygen he has breathed his entire life. Coaches keep a private vocabulary for this problem. They separate the strokes a player truly owns from the ones he merely rents, and a rented stroke tends to be one he never chose to practice for its own sake. It surfaces only in emergencies, stiff and hesitant, because the repetitions that would have made it automatic never happened. Converting a rented shot into an owned one is grindingly dull labor. It unfolds in empty arenas on gray mornings, across hundreds of reps that earn no applause and generate no viral clip, purely so the stroke feels reflexive the single time a major hangs on it. That is precisely the ledger Lopez inherited when he took the chair. He has to coax the most watched entertainer in the sport into spending his dullest hours falling for the least glamorous shot in tennis, all while the player now holds more say than ever over how those hours get filled. Every great career eventually arrives at this fork, and the answer defines everything that follows. Roger Federer's slice became a signature that let him play deep into his late 30s. Buying time his aging legs could no longer manufacture on their own. Novak Djokovic weaponized the same stroke into a defensive shield that frustrated a generation of bigger hitters into submission. The carve is not decoration for the champions who last. It is scaffolding, the unglamorous structure that holds a game upright once the raw athleticism begins to fade. Alcaraz is young enough that he can still bludgeon his way past most problems today. Athleticism is a loan, though, never a gift, and the interest always comes due. The player who banks a bulletproof slice at 22 is the player still lifting majors at 34, long after the sprint has slowed and the leap has shortened. Zoom out and the significance reaches well beyond one rivalry. The players remembered as the very greatest were seldom the ones boasting the single biggest weapon. They were the ones without a hideable flaw, competitors who left an opponent nowhere to aim and nothing to exploit across 5 sets, on any surface, in any weather. Alcaraz already owns firepower most legends would envy, alongside a complete set of major titles gathered at frightening speed. The final separation between a wonderful champion and an untouchable one usually hides in the least thrilling details, the reset shots and neutral rallies that quietly strip an opponent of his last hope. His slice belongs squarely to that category. Master it, and no obvious avenue to hurt him remains. Leave it half-built, and every shrewd coach on tour keeps a working blueprint for the same ambush. There is a strange beauty in the shape of this flaw. B,